Hey everybody, welcome to The Secret History Living in Your Aquarium. Today we're going to be talking about disappearing fish. Now, if you want a really quick rundown, I'm going to give it to all you impatient people right now. So, if you're wondering where the heck is my fish, well, the answer is it probably died or jumped out of the tank if you've been waiting a while. Now, to be sure of this, what you can do is you can put food in the tank, preferably at night, but it depends on what kind of fish you have. But generally, fish feel safer when it's at least dim lighting, if not dark and nighttime. But go ahead, put food, whatever you think their favorite food is, usually a higher protein food. Sarah O-Nip tabs are another really good one that stick to the glass and make lots of fish come out. But, you know, if it's a catfish, maybe algae wafers or bloodworms, something like that. Try frozen food. Walk away for a while and then come back about an hour later and see what's going on in the tank. See if the fish has come out. If you have a really active tank, obviously come back when you think that the food will still be there and hasn't been eaten yet. So it could be that you want to just sit back with the flashlight or even the light on your phone or turn the blue light on the tank and sit back and wait and see if the fish comes out. Now, if it's not there, it could be trapped somewhere like in one of the pipes in your back of your filter or in some decor. Like, these are all the really obvious things. And I feel like I don't need to make a whole video about it, but we're going to make a video about why it is that fish just disappear, and also kind of the science behind when a fish dies in your tank and is just totally gone. What's going on? And also some of the ways you can prevent this, how you can prevent fish from jumping from your tank, because that's probably the number one way that people have fish vanish. So let's jump right in and talk about all of this now that we've covered the most obvious answers to why a fish might go missing. So welcome back to the channel for everybody who has watched before, and welcome for the first time if you're new. We're going to talk about this extremely common issue that many aquarium owners face. That's fish disappearing suddenly from their tanks. It can be frustrating, it can be a mysterious experience, but don't worry guys, I am here to help. The reasons for these fishy mysteries range from things I'm sure y'all considered, like the stuff we just talked about, to snails and detrivores, decomposing a deceased fish body. Also, fish could have passed away and now be stuck inside a filter intake pipe, or possibly it's flopped around on the floor and gone all the way under some furniture across the room. In this video, we're going to cover all the places to check and things you can do to determine if your fish is really gone, but we're going to discuss the root cause of why fish jump, why fish get so stressed and just suddenly die, and some of the fascinating, if not odd, reasons behind these antics, and why a fish just comes flying out of a tank for no reason. The things that baffle fish keepers of new and old alike. Things like pheromones, things like cortisol, and other hormones that we share with fish that cause a fish in the tank not being cared for ideally to actually just swim away from the tank. And over time, these chemicals can signal anything from spawning and being happy to lots of food to predators nearby and anything in between. These chemicals can be intensified without doing water changes, and that's one of the reasons we do them, other than nitrates and nitrites and ammonia, is removing these excess chemicals. Unfortunately, it is common for our tanks to have much smaller volumes of water than in nature, and there's no dilution by a flow or outlets or inflows or rain or anything like that. It's all up to us. So fish often have a sense of danger coming, or a sense for finding mates, or a sense for food nearby, and they send these signals to each other just like a language, just like talking. So let's talk about the host of situations we can think of in which these things go on, and let's dive into the possible reasons for the fish disappearing. Now, the usual suspect right away is tight spaces. So make sure to check, like I said, filter intakes, tubes, your hang off the back filter and the void it can have in it. Same with your lily pipes and things like that if you have an aquascape tank. It's a very common reaction to stress for these fish to get scared and then try to go hide somewhere. That is their natural fight or flight response, just like we have that with stress. And fish are startled easily. They oftentimes will go under rocks, into voids, under logs or wood in the tank, and even burrow under the sand when it's species you wouldn't expect that. Not only that, they've evolved to camouflage, and if not camouflage, they have evolved to trick our eye not into seeing them, not to be where they're expected to be oriented, this way rather than this way, to be vertical rather than horizontal. And all of a sudden, when you're scanning the tank looking for something, you don't necessarily see a fish that's pretending to be a leaf, so to speak. So the other place they often go is right up to the water line or right down to a corner, but they can also get in between all sorts of hardware and heaters and filter clips and anything else with a suction cup. They oftentimes will wedge themselves in between just because of being startled. Now, overcrowding is a root cause of that, and so are several other things we'll get to soon. But overcrowding on its own can really lead to a lot of problems, including stress, which raises the cortisol, disease, and poor water quality, nitrates, nitrites, and ammonia. Fish release both ammonia and all sorts of other waste products, and even their slime coats have pheromones and chemical signals that put out signals, obviously. Secondly, as fish cycle through their day, they release cortisol and other hormones, just like we do. We do into our blood. They do into their blood, but they also do it into their environment in order to tell other fish what's going on. They don't have a language, obviously. They don't have writing. So it's all about body language and chemical expressions that they have. So without water changes, these chemicals can build up to the point that they trigger a fish to think, oh no, there's a predator in the tank, and just be stressed, and it just grates on them and wears them down. So the obvious first thing that they would do is go hide, and a lot of creatures simply evolve to go hide. And it may not be apparent to many fish keepers at first, but your fish will be most at home and active if they have an environment that's similar to their wild habitat. And what may not be apparent is something that sounds contradictory, and that's that a shy fish, you're going to see it more if it has lots of places to hide. It's used to a biome, most likely, or an ecosystem where it has places to hide. So be it thick planted tanks, sand caves, stone piles, dark substrate rather than really bright, colorful ones, or light ones where the fish stands out, really contrasting from above or below, having a white ceiling even. You have to think about these fish are thinking of, is a predator looking up at me? If they hang out at the top of the water, if they hang out at the bottom of the water, then they're worried about a predator looking down on them. And does that contrast? Does that look different? And is something as simple as a white ceiling and a dark fish profile, they may feel stressed because they're not used to that. They're used to having a different, maybe it's jungle canopy over their water. And an interesting thing, if you look at the bellies of most fish that are wild colored, phantom tetras in this tank or all sorts of corridoras and things, they have light bellies in most fish and dark tops. Well, it's so that predators can actually not see them as well. It camouflages them. So it's a really great way for them to have evolved, but a lot of times it clashes with a translucent box that we put them in. So sticks and stones are another good place for them to hide, obviously. And anything that breaks up the line of sight is going to stop feuds between fish. So even if you got the chemical signaling under control in your tank and you're doing water changes weekly or every few days, however much you feel is needed for your specific situation, I'm going to defer to you guys on that. But I want you to think, if your fish are acting stressed or if they keep getting sick, it could be something like that. For instance, guppies are always trying to mate. Male guppies always trying to mate with female guppies. And this stresses them out to the point that oftentimes they get sick and they pass away. Now, if you give them lots of areas to break up the space and you change the ratio of the genders, this can cut down on a lot of the stress that happens in our tanks. And that's true with cichlids as well. That's true with many little fish, even tetras and rasboras. Putting them in a ratio, usually with 2 or 3 to 1, 2 or 3 females to 1 male, is always a good idea. Now, in general, males in fish are kind of the prettier of the 2 genders and have the most colors. So a lot of times people have that ratio way off. So at least try to have 1 to 1, if not having a ratio that's even more extreme in favor of the females getting some rest between them. Now, I've actually found that placing more leaves in my tank, more stuff in my tank, really helps with all those little nano species, the rasboras, CPDs, tetras, you name it, any of those little fish, pseudomagills, things like that. With a flick of their tail, they're gone, they're hiding. And because of that, it means that they feel like they can come out into the open voids in between, and they can be social and not be startled so easily. Whereas if they have to go all the way across the tank, or forbid they don't even have anywhere to go, then they're not going to come out. They're probably going to hide down in the corner. Now, the next big thing on the list is poor water quality, not in a chemical, emotional, fishy brain kind of way, but in things like pH, temperature, water hardness, and all these things can make a fish become sick. Fish use their lateral lines, the lines that go down their side on almost all fish. Some have 2 of them, or bifurcated lateral lines. Others have a continuous one, but this is like a second set of eyes, or almost like another sense, and it allows them to visualize. Some fish, we've found actually, in their brain, in their visual cortex, it allows them to literally see waves, sound waves, or S waves, or P waves we call them. Just like from an earthquake, there's S waves and P waves. Well, moving through water, there's that also. One is one that moves through it, and the other is the waves that compress the molecules of the water together. And oftentimes underwater, like sound, it can amplify it, things like bass. So for example, you wouldn't want to have loud music right next to your fish tank. Don't put a stereo on full blast next to your fish, because the bass may feel like a bass hunting down your little nano fish. Sorry, I know that was a bad pun. So these senses allow them to literally see and sense what's in muddy and murky waters. And a lot of times we want crystal clear tanks. And we assume that, this is what the fish want too. But most fish aren't from crystal clear waters. There are some that are. But just keep in mind that that's already another thing that is different from how they evolved in many cases. A lot of Amazonian fish, a lot of Southeast Asian and African fish are from rivers and lakes that are very murky, that have algae, that have silt and things kicked up in them, that make it so that in the day they are kind of hard to see. And at night, things like moonlight reflect off fish also. So you actually have a lot of things that fish keep in mind when thinking about, is it safe to come out? So something like a pitch black, dark room with the lights all of a sudden coming on can really startle fish. They think, oh no, predators, where? And again, they're all sending those signals, they're all going scattering, and it can send a chain reaction off. In fact, in this tank, if I turn the lights off too quickly, all the rummy nose tetras just will start jumping, and it looks like the water's almost boiling. They get so upset. So learn what it is that sets off your species and what you keep in your tanks, obviously. Remember that life underwater is very different from life on land, and things fish count on underwater to navigate that are different too. So ultraviolet light, for instance, we don't see ultraviolet light, but the reflective iridescence, the kind of shimmer on a fish, that is reflective UV light in many cases, and it's there as camouflage. So while to us it may look like the fish is bright silver and shiny, that fish actually may appear to its predators as a disco ball of lots of tiny little fish and flashes going everywhere. It's almost like overwhelming what's looking at them. And when they're in a school, it's even more effective. They look like rays of tiny little reflections of light going in every direction, and it actually confuses predators that see that ultraviolet light. It works with visual light a bit too. But for instance, colors are different underwater, and a bright red cichlid may appear like a dark gray. A bright red might even look like a dull gray, because the color red doesn't show up underwater after about 12 feet. So if you have cichlids from the Rift Lakes with red on them, their natural camouflage and where they feel comfortable, they're going to be hiding amongst stuff with a luminosity, or basically if you were to put it into a black and white picture, if you took a black and white picture of your tank, look at it, and that will tell you how many spots you have where they feel like they could hide. If the stick looks dark to you and the sand looks bright white, you know there's a contrast there. And if the fish looks gray, then you're going to know maybe some rocks that show up in a black and white picture as gray too. It's kind of a nice trick to make them feel at home, because all the colors start disappearing as you get deeper and deeper in water. It's just a quirk of optics and physics. Now, fish also, they like to school, and a lot of times they don't have their natural school together, and we expect them to be swimming horizontally back and forth, but sometimes they will make a run for it up or down, and they'll go into any opening that they can. Now, if you haven't seen many snails in your tank, yet you still are noticing that fish bodies end up a little more than a skull, or maybe like kind of a mushy piece of white or tan or clear tissue, then it may be that you have nocturnal predators like scuds or planaria that are coming and eating the remnants of your fish. And that's not a bad thing. Naturally, we want bacteria, fungi, and little microorganisms in our tank to break that down. Our fish also happily eat those. And most often, you know, ram's horn snails, Malaysian trumpet snails, which actually hide in the substrate, they help to turn over the substrate. They help to break down waste that fish don't want. And so you've got, you know, your predatory fish or your community fish that are up in the midwater, like an angelfish. Well, they miss some food, it goes down. Then your cory catfish, or maybe your plecos, then they have a go at what got missed, and on the algae and things. And then their waste gets passed through again by another set of critters in your tank if you have a balanced ecosystem. Your snails, your shrimp, your scuds, ostracods, you know, you name it. It could be in there if you have an old tank or a very diverse tank. I try to have those things in mind, with the exception of planaria. That's the one where I could take it or leave it, but usually I don't see many if there's a lot of fish in the tank, and I have a whole video on that subject if you're curious. But go ahead and also try to come in and put food in your tank at night. Like I said in the beginning, come in with a flashlight, or if you're British, come in with the torch, and see what's nibbling on the food you put in there in the dark. You may find that some catfish you haven't seen in years, or a pleco, is just hiding all the time. Now, another big thing is illness. Illness and disease can cause fish to act really erratically, cause them to die, and then if you got those other things in your tank, they're going to disappear. So if possible, try and quarantine any new fish in a sparsely decorated tank with a nice tight lid on it, and watch them during feeding time, and see that how they eat, how they react, and also, you know, keep the lights dim for them a lot of times. That's probably good advice for most species, so they're not stressed. Because traveling as a fish, whether it's from the pet store or through the mail or whatever it may be, the post if you're in the UK, then that always stresses them out. And that bag of water they're in, definitely don't dump that into the aquarium, because one, it's full of waste with nitrogen properties like ammonia, ammonium, nitrites, and nitrates, but it's also going to have other chemicals and things like we've been talking about that are stressful to fish. Sometimes their slime coat is actually designed to irritate other fish, or designed to repel parasites and other things like that. And so it can actually be something that builds up in the water and is annoying to other fish too. Predators may have simply eaten your fish is another thing that could happen. It's not always bigger fish that hunt down your fish and make them disappear, but sometimes they just get hassled by one another. A lot of people wonder, how is it that this fish just passed away? Like, one fish all of a sudden is gone or passed away. I see it and it's passed away, but all the other fish are fine. Well, check around the gills. Oftentimes you can see that they've been rammed, or the gills are bruising or red, and sometimes you can catch it early before they've been bullied to the point of no return. Now, the fish that tend to eat your fish once they do pass away are things like catfish, goldfish, plecos, loaches, you name it. Live bears sometimes come down and pick at it, and then of course snails and the microorganisms. And in a well-balanced nature tank, or a tank like this planted with a whole bunch of those spots on the trophic ecosystem, food web filled, you're going to see that actually a body of a fish won't last more than about 12 to 24 hours. And then it's just going to be a tiny cartilaginous spine and maybe a skull. All right, so let's visit one more time talking about jumping out of the tank. Sometimes people just don't want to put a lid on a tank. I get it. I do the same. But you want to leave a lip then, so that it's at least as tall as the fish is long, is what my general rule is. So that's going to mean if I have pseudomagills in here, I'm going to have at least a 2-inch lip from the water line to the top. Now that won't stop all of them from jumping, but that will stop a lot of them, and it'll cause them, the angle they jump at usually is pretty oblique, and it'll allow it so that they hit that rim more often than not. Now, why do they jump other than being startled, obviously, or stressed? Well, it could be your pH, it could be your nitrates, your ammonia, it could be that the heater broke, so check those things. As a side note, I've saved many a fish when I worked at a pet store and put them back in the water, and the main thing that causes a fish to die when it's out of water is that it gets all sorts of stuff on it that then causes it to get secondary infections, and it rubs its slime coat off. And then their slime coat, which is their immune system basically, just like we get a runny nose, they have it all over through glands that secrete it all over their body. Well, they get things like lint or dust or hair all over them when they get on, say, a carpet or flooring, and they flop around and it sticks to them. And then when we try to brush that off, oftentimes we do more harm than good. So when a fish jumps, it's good, obviously, to get them off of the floor, but use something like a magazine or a cutting board or something really thin, maybe a cover of a book, and slide it under the fish, or just gently put your hand right next to the fish so that it's going to flop away from your hand and onto the magazine, and then simply put it right back into the tank as long as there's nothing super harmful on it, and then grab the hair or dust bunnies and stuff off of it after it's in the tank. People do so much more harm than good most of the time when they panic and they try to pick up their fish, and they then give it abrasions on its body and rip off scales and all sorts of other things. Then they get secondary infections. Now, when they're out of the water, other than secondary infections, they also have a problem with their gills, their eyes, and any other membranes that are wet, essentially, or slimy, their mucous membranes are going to dry out. And some fish, they can stand days out of water. Plecos and catfish in some cases. Some perch actually are like the walking perch. But most fish, it's a matter of minutes to an hour or so. And they need to be rehydrated so they can breathe again. In the wild, the worst thing that happens is that, a fish doesn't like the pond it's in. The water conditions have changed in a bad way and it knows it needs to move. And most of our species are from the equator, from tropical flooded jungles and rivers and things. And there's a pretty good chance that if it flops onto the shore, shallow water onto the shore, that it either messed up and it can flop back, or that it keeps flopping and there's a puddle or something that it's going to flop into. And that's going to be a better place for it, especially things like gouramis and bettas and some of the rainbow fish or pseudomagills. Now, those gills that get dried out on any fish, what you can do to help them out when you do put them back in the tank is put an air stone in there or increase the flow so that there's more oxygen. Because a lot of times, be it from ammonia during shipping or from being attacked by other fish, if they have hurt gills, dry gills, cut gills, scarred gills, they can't breathe. It's like their lungs. And so you want to make sure that they can, one, absorb the water that's in there. It doesn't hurt to do a salt dip on the fish either. It will help draw out some of the other swelling and inflammation issues. And then when you put them back into the tank, do the salt dip, a few hours after they've been in the water. But once they're in the tank, you can make sure that there's plenty of botanicals too, because things like catappa almond leaves or cholla wood or whatever you want to use for tannins, leaf litter, is going to really, really help and get that mucous membrane and their biofilm back to tippy-top shape. Now, I want to point out that humans can actually smell rain, and we can smell when it starts to rain because of ions of water and because of a chemical named ozone. And ozone is a chemical we evolved to smell because it tells us there's going to be fresh pooling water, or there's a waterfall or flowing water which is safe to drink, generally speaking, compared to stagnant water. So we can smell that 1 in a billion particles in the air. It's the thing that humans can smell the best. Well, fish have us beat, but they can smell the same things. And moving water, even from a water faucet, puts off ions. And ions also can be smelled individually by fish oftentimes. And fish that grow in areas where it dries out, so any type of labyrinth fish, bettas, gouramis, licorice gouramis, paradise fish, things like that, they actually can sense that. So can a lot of catfish and other swampy fish, darters and things like that. And they can sense 1 per trillion molecules or more molecules. They can sense 1 particle in the air that's being then incorporated into the water just by the water moving. So they can smell outside the tank. That's how cool and how sensitive our fish are. And things like catfish have over 1,000 taste buds on the outside of their body. All catfish. That's like the minimum. Some have way more than that. But it's pretty amazing the way their cell sensory network works. Now, last couple things. Make sure you've got a proper tank size. Obviously, if you've got a big old fish in a little tank, it's going to be more likely to jump. Regular maintenance, changing that water, monitoring the water parameters, making sure nothing's broken, the heater's not putting out a stray current that's causing them to panic, making sure that your air systems, whether that's for a sponge filter or for an airline, that it's working and your fish are going to be used to the oxygen saturation. With the more heat you have in the tank, so if you're keeping discus or blue rams or something like that, German blue rams, and you're at 85 degrees, you're going to want to have a lot more oxygen than if you're keeping fish at, say, 60 degrees in a tank. Because the warmer the water is, the less oxygen it holds. You also want to make sure to do plenty of water changes, especially if you're doing a planted tank, low-tech tank, and you've been changing things a lot. Couple last tips: don't vacuum and like bump the fish tank, or those vibrations if you're running a saw or a vacuum or exercise equipment, I don't know, you name it, a mixer right next to your fish tank. They can feel that through any foundation and walls and floors and all that, and it's a very foreign sound to them that sounds like a school of approaching fish or something, like thousands of invaders, like an army of orcs or something coming to storm Helm's Deep. I don't know. So don't do that. And also, you know, when it's nighttime, give them a little bit of time to settle down. So, you know, also when you're feeding, which I tend to do at night, at least once is nighttime, once is morning time, but feed your fish that need more care. Feed them, like the ones that hide down low, feed them with a turkey baster or with something like tweezers or tongs that you can get some food down to them. Feed the others up here that are all rambunctious, and then feed some others, you know, mid-water, and have foods that make sense for that break down or that float or that don't break down or that don't float, sinking pellets. You guys are smart. You can figure this out. But also, you know, watch for signs of illness always in a tank. Just if your tank, if you see that a fish is getting lethargic, or that it's turning and flashing and twitching and kind of making weird movements, you know, it can really avoid a lot of headaches and heartbreaks if you had observed that fish, especially when it was in quarantine and you've read about how it acts, how it behaves, what mating behavior looks like, because a lot of times that's a lot of tweaking and twitching and twerking, and you want to be aware of that so that you don't think that it's illness accidentally. Now, also when you put in new fish, when you get something new, once it's through your quarantine process, or if you say, skip all that, I'm gonna play dice here and risk it, and you just dump the fish in, you want to definitely do that carefully, be around, watch, because a lot of times that's when the conflict's gonna happen. That's when someone's gonna jump out of the water too. So those are kind of the possible reasons and prevention tips I have for your fish disappearing and or hiding all the time. And I hope this information helps you keep your fish a little happier, a little more healthy. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below, obviously. If you have any other tips, I love having everybody share their experiences here in the comments. And I hope you enjoyed this content. If you did, I'd appreciate a thumbs up, share, you know, giving me a few $100,000, whatever you feel is fair. So thanks guys for watching. If you really want to support the channel and the things I do here, check out a whole lot more videos on subjects like this and history and everything in between, the future of fish, fish sciences. It's only $1.99 to become a member and help me do what it is I do here. What do I do here? Anyhow, that is it for today, and thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, guys. Bye. Okay.